Hi, everyone. My name is Imran Ahmad. I'm a partner here at Norton Rose Fulbright Canada. I head up our technology law practice in Canada, and I'm delighted to have for our next technology primer, Suzie Suleiman, who's a superstar associate in our technology, privacy, and cyber group. And she's going to be talking about one of the hottest topics that are out there in 2023, artificial intelligence and how they impact transactions. So maybe just to set the stage, Suzie, because we're going to have a good conversation here. I'm looking forward to it. Tell me, what are we seeing in the AI transactional side? I hear a lot of M&A activity going on. What can you just tell us to set the stage right now?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in 2023, despite economic trends, technology saw the highest growth of inbound cross-border M&A activity. And there's been a number of factors contributing to this. There's obviously the rise of generative AI platforms like ChatGPT, the number of new products and improved capabilities of these generative AI platforms. Businesses continue desire to improve efficiency and accuracy. And then there's a significant global shortage of AI talent. So even though lots of organizations are raising their budgets and they're paying more for AI talent, they're still struggling to find the right skill sets and retaining that talent once they find them. So as a result, they're looking to acquire the right resources in other ways.
Right, makes good sense. Can you talk us through sort of the M&A due diligence process? New technology, is there a new process we should be thinking about, key considerations?
For sure. I think AI presents unique risks into a deal. It's different from your usual technology or software type deals. And so it's really important to have a deal team that understands those specific challenges to ensure that the AI technology holds genuine value and that you can understand the risk profile of any given transaction that you're considering.
Right. Makes sense. Just like the companies are acquiring talent, you need to make sure that the advisors, either investment bankers, lawyers, you name it, also have the same kind of skill set in AI. Makes sense. Let's talk about some of the risks, right? There's a lot of optimism and upside to artificial intelligence and generative AI in general that we're hearing about. But what are some of the risks when you're looking at a transaction, doing due diligence, that folks should be looking out for?
For sure. I think the main big risks in AI are the risks of biases and inaccurate outputs. Depending on the functionality of that AI tool, the risks can vary. So, for example, if it's an AI tool that makes decisions about an individual, if it's reviewing employee applications or university applications or whatever it is, or if it's used in the healthcare setting, if there are risks of inaccuracies or biases, those are much more significant than in other AI tools that might be used only for editorial purposes. And so, as the buyer or the acquirer of something, of an AI tool, you're going to want to get comfortable with a number of different things. For example, what data was used to train the AI model? Did the seller have the rights to use that model? I think it's a common misconception that publicly available data is free for anyone to use. And we'll commonly see a lot of companies or developers using data from the internet to train their AI algorithm, but that could be violating a number of third-party rights. So you'll want to know where that data came from, how reliable it is, what research went into developing it, who developed it, what kind of skill sets and qualifications did those people have, what kind of testing was conducted, whether they're aware of any errors or bugs, what kind of procedures and policies they have in place, and if they're sufficient to identify and reduce the likelihood of biases and inaccurate outputs in its training process. And what kind of training do they provide their employees to kind of manage all of these risks? Depending on the type of transaction, the buyer may also want to look at the seller's contractual relationships with their customers. So what kind of liability limits do they have in those agreements? And what reps and warranties do they make? So essentially, I think the two big issues you want to look at is how was the AI developed, making sure that it was done, in a industry standard, reasonable manner. But then if something goes wrong, how much liability could I face if all of that is, if there are any issues in the way it was developed?
Right. And what I'm hearing from you is there are a lot of questions you need to ask. And sometimes you'll have to ask even more right now because it is still an emerging area in the transactional space. Certainly people have acquired and build companies in the AI space in the past few years. But in terms of buying companies that may have other types of data that they have collected over the last year or so, especially with the advent of generative AI, could be a bit more complex. So
Absolutely.
let's focus in a bit more in terms of other areas that folks should be concerned about. Obviously, the three that come up the most are intellectual property issues, copyright in particular, privacy. So you mentioned data earlier. You may be collecting as an AI solution some kind of personal information or have staff putting some information in there. And then cybersecurity, which is always a hot topic. Can you talk us through those issues and what people should be looking for?
For sure. I mentioned earlier from the IP perspective, making sure that you have sufficient rights to use the data that train the algorithm. The same goes with open source software. Again, open source software is publicly available, but it's not necessarily free for you to use however you want. It is subject to licensing terms. And if there's any open source software incorporated into the algorithm, that is subject to a copyleft license, the developer may have obligations to make that software code available online for free for others to use. And so that can really impact the acquirer's ability to commercialize it. So in the due diligence process, it's important to ensure, any kind of copyrighted material that's incorporated into the company or into the technology that the company has is not infringing a third party's IP rights or other proprietary rights that they may have. And then when it comes to cybersecurity, the more we adopt technology, the higher the cybersecurity risks. And a cybersecurity attack can have catastrophic impacts, I think, particularly in AI type technology, especially if it's used in certain settings. So for example, if it's used in the healthcare setting, a bug could result in improper outcomes and serious risks to an individual's health. And so if there is a cyber attack, or if the technology is susceptible to cyber attacks, it can be difficult to remedy, and there can be significant impacts to the operation of the company. So when doing the cyber due diligence as an acquirer, we'll want to understand what policies, procedures, and tools are employed by the developer, and what kind of training, again, that they provide to their employees on that front, making sure that people in certain positions have appropriate training, and that they're carrying out their responsibilities properly. And then when it comes to AI systems, if they're trained using human data, or if they accept personal information as an input, it's important to ensure that the developer has complied with applicable privacy laws in carrying out those activities. So you're going to want to have visibility into the origin of the data set used to train the AI system, and then what processes are used to anonymize any personal information, and particular care should be taken around their privacy policies and their procedures, and again, how they train their employees on those fronts.
Great. That's super helpful, Susie. Let me ask you, actually, as a general comment, whenever I'm looking at SPAs and I see a provision in there that talks about compliance with laws, question is which laws, right? So when you're looking at AI in particular, putting aside for a second privacy, because we do know that there's privacy legislation, not just in Canada and provincially, but in other jurisdictions as well that need to be complied with. What other AI type laws are out there that you can talk to us about?
Yeah, so Canada has recently tabled IDA, or the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, as part of Bill C-27, but that's not expected to come into force until at least 2025. Other jurisdictions, the US, Europe, UK, are all tabling similar legislation. But there is a discrepancy between how quickly AI is being adopted and how much time it takes for these laws to come into effect. So it introduces an additional layer of uncertainty into a transaction, because right now there are no legal obligations to comply for developers on the AI front, but it's going to come into force. And recently, the Minister of Innovation, Science, and Industry released a voluntary code of conduct specifically for generative AI. And it's intended to be a bridge until IDA comes into force. It encourages its signatories to promote and build a robust and responsible AI ecosystem in Canada. So organizations developing or managing the operations of these systems will implement responsible generative AI practices to mitigate adverse impacts associated with advanced generative AI systems. And so while right now there are no laws requiring developers to comply with them, specifically in respect of AI, complying with this kind of code or similar codes helps reduce the risk in an overall transaction, and it helps bring you into compliance more easily when those laws do come into effect.
Right, got it. So there is a movement towards regulating this, and there will be laws that are, they're advancing through parliamentary system or otherwise. So we should keep our eyes out for it. But right now, no hard formal laws, but definitely guidelines, frameworks, recommendations, voluntary codes of conduct, like you mentioned as well, that are out there. Last question for you, Suzie, before we wrap up. So let's say I have started a company. It's an AI-driven solution company, and I'm the developer owner, and I'm looking to sell my company maybe down the road, maybe not right away, but down the road at some point if I get a great offer. What are some of the key things I should be doing now to be prepared for that exit? Thinking from the perspective of what the buyer may be looking for. Do you have any quick tips?
For sure. I mean, I think as a developer, if you want to set yourself up for future success, you'll want to think about what is a buyer or buyer going to be looking at when they're doing their due diligence. So you're going to want to track where your data and your open source software is coming from, how you're using it, whether there are any restrictions associated with it. So being very diligent in terms of what you're incorporating, how you're incorporating it, limiting liability in your agreements with your customers as much as feasible, identifying and minimizing inaccuracies and biases. So having those policies and procedures in place to handle those when they come about. Training your employees or anybody involved in the process on privacy, cybersecurity, IP, ethical AI practices, all of that. And then if you're using personal information, being very careful to make sure you're complying with privacy laws in all of the applicable jurisdictions, obtaining consents, tracking consents, withdrawals, all of that. And then that you have appropriate cybersecurity measures in place to maintain the integrity of your technology. So just making sure you're constantly complying with industry standard on that front.
That's great. Thank you so much for taking just a few minutes to talk us through all these different issues. It's an evolving and emerging area, so I'm going to come back to you soon, and maybe we'll do a part two to this. I can't believe it's the end of the year. It's already December 2023. We'll be back in 24 with Suzie and other team members as well. But for our audience and listeners, like I said, AI is such an evolving area. We are now going to be putting out a quarterly roundup bulletin that's going to basically track legislative, case law, and other types of developments. If you'd like to be added to our mailing list, please email Suzie Suleiman, who's on the screen here with me, my very good colleague in our technology group, or email me or DM me, whichever is easier, and we'll make sure we add you, the first one coming out at the end of Q1 2024. That's all the time we have. Thanks again, Suzie, and we'll see you on the other side of the year.
Thank you.